Well, good afternoon. Today we're in Psalm chapter 63. This is really a devotional kind of psalm. It reminds me of what Jesus said in Matthew, the 22nd chapter, that we ought to love the Lord with all our heart, soul, and mind. And what you see in this particular psalm is David's great love for the Lord. And you see it in what we might call personal relationship or an intimate relationship. I know that sometimes people have difficulty with that concept, especially if they think that God is distant or somewhat abstract. But if you look at many of the words that are used to describe our relationship with God, I think that you can see how it ought to be a personal relationship with God. Now, notice I said personal. And then what we mean by that, though, is the words that are often used to describe this relationship is trust, and that's relational, isn't it? Love, that's relational. Loyalty, those are relational kind of terms, and there's many, many more. And so, what you see in this devotional psalm is David's great love for the Lord, and you see it in some of these relational terms. So, let's begin to look at Psalm chapter 63. There's two verses that I want you to look at for a moment. In verse number 1, David says, "O God, thou art my God. Early will I seek thee. My soul thirsteth after thee. My flesh longeth after thee in a dry and thirsty land and where no water is." And then down in verse number 7, or verse number 6 rather, "When I remember thee on my bed and meditate on thee in the night watches." So let's begin by noting that prayer was such a vital part of David's life. And I want to suggest to you that two things regarding this is that we have a plan in prayer. That is, we're planning each day about the content and the time of prayer, because you see that here, that in the morning or early, the first thing that David is thinking about is in his devotional to God. And early will I seek thee. I don't know about you, after you get your both eyes open and you're ready to get the morning started, and before you go off to work, may I suggest to you that before you get involved in your daily activities and all the things that begin to bombard us, that you begin your morning in prayer. And then if you notice the verse that I just read in verse number 6, at the close of the day, notice that David says, "During those night hours on my bed, I meditate on thee." And so, why don't we begin the day in prayer and then end the day in prayer before you go to sleep at night and before you're worn out and you just sort of just doze off? End your night in prayer. That, I'm telling you, it'll make a difference for you. Notice when I talk about a pattern and a plan for prayer, they had that in Jewish community. If you remember over in Acts chapter 3 and verse 1, how Peter and John went up to the temple to pray in the hour of prayer. And so it'd be good that we discipline ourselves and not just it be sporadic, that we have certain times during the day that we set aside purposely, deliberately in prayer. So let's look real quickly to this psalm. We'll just read a few verses today. Notice here again, there's this great yearning and desire for God. It's like David is in the wilderness, and it's a dry place in the wilderness, and there's no water, and so in that particular kind of dry place, you just naturally desire for water. And I think that hunger is a natural desire, and you don't have to teach people hunger, and you don't have to teach rather people thirst. It's sort of a natural thing. And can I suggest this? If you have lost your desire to seek out the Lord, and you lost your desire to assemble with the saints, or you lost your desire to pray. Do it more. I mean, when you recognize things are slipping there, pray more often. If you've been missing church and you've been sporadic in your attendance, you got to see that as a red flag. You start going more. You get yourself involved. You get there because you see you got to get to the water and you got to get there to the hut where you can feed your soul. And so it's so very, very important. I wish I had some more time to talk about this, but I think that those who are sporadic deliberately in their attendance, I'm not talking about illness or things that really, really hinder you from being there. And I know all the things that are going on, but you need to check on your soul. And if you see that your soul is not where it ought to be, then you got to double up and put some real effort in there, because I'm telling you, if you don't, you'll keep slipping further and further away. So you see here, the Bible talks about desire the sincere milk of the word. I'll tell you what, there was a time in my life when I was not saved. I was a young man. I didn't know anything about the Bible. I think the only book I may have heard of was the book of Genesis. But since I've been saved and since I've been a preacher for all these years, the Word of God is so vital and so important to me. I enjoy studying and I enjoy knowing what the Word of God is. I enjoy worshiping and I want to do it deeper and deeper and deeper. But I tell you what, if church is boring to you and the sermons are boring to you, it may not be what's going on in church. It may be what's going on in you. And so I'm just trying to encourage you that you take a pretty good look at this whole business, because it's something that's really, really important to do. And so what David does, he goes, I want to see your power, that is, experience your power in his life and his glory, so as I have seen in the sanctuary. There you go back to the idea of church. Sanctuary for them was the temple or the tabernacle. We use the word sanctuary. I want to use it in a loose, very loose sense about being in church. It's so important about it being assembling with the saints. Now, and then because you see there's a gratitude in the devotional way in David because of God's loving kindness, his steadfast love. And so what David will say is, think about God's love for you, David. For David was better than even life. Oh, what a tremendous thought. Let me slow down on that again. God's love for you is more important than life indeed. What a tremendous, tremendous thought. And thinking how the love of God for you is more important than anything and anything else. That's a great verse to remember, isn't it? And so David goes on to say, I will bless thee. That means I will praise you, and I will express my gratitude for you, and I will do that, he says, with my hands. There's the gesture. Of course, the gesture, Jewish gesture, was they would oftentimes lift up their hands in prayer. And so what you see is David, out of his gratitude for God, out of his love for God, expresses that in his praising for God and his desire to be with God, his desire to be in the sanctuary. And I'm just trying to remind you of that whole thought there, that if you have a real desire for God and you really desire his word, you won't have any trouble getting to church. Now, notice, and we'll just conclude this, my soul shall be satisfied. You know, a reason a lot of folks' lives are not satisfied is because they really haven't given it to God. Now, I don't want to sound like pious pablum here, but that's the absolute truth. If you give your heart to God, you'll find satisfaction. And he'll go on down in verse number 7, talking about joy and rejoicing in the Lord. And so there's some important concepts in this particular psalm. I hope they're helpful to you. I hope that you'll reflect upon those and make the steps you need to step as we continue to move forward in the book of Psalms. And we'll be in Psalm 64 tomorrow. I hope to see you with me then.